Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to spend some time on marriage as part of our marriage series. And specifically today, we're going to go into a topic we call cool your tongue. What do you think about when you think about your tongue when it comes to marriage?
Good question. Well, it's powerful. I actually know that from scripture. But, I mean, gosh, it can be used for good. It can be used for evil, to tear your spouse down or to build them up. And, encourage or discourage, hurt or help.
Yeah. There was this old saying when we were young that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And it turns out that's wrong.
Right. Not true at all. Words can really sting.
Yeah, and you can't undo them.
Right.
Once they're out, you can't undo them.
Yeah, I forget where I heard this before, but it was done in like a kid's VBS or something, or Sunday school, where they took a tube of toothpaste and the teacher squeezed out the tube of toothpaste, or maybe each kiddo had one, I'm not sure. And they squeezed it out, and they were comparing that to when you speak, and then they said, try to get this toothpaste back in the tube. And well, of course they couldn't do it, right? It was impossible. And they were comparing that to how our words, when we speak them, they're out there. There's no getting them back, taking them or putting them back in.
And it turns out the Bible has a lot to say about words.
Yeah,
and we'll definitely
for sure
go into that. Well, today, though, we're talking about as it relates to marriage, even though most of this will be relevant for anyone because words in relationships are so critical. In marriage, probably even more important, let's say, because I like how when we were talking about this earlier, you said, hey, marriage is a picture of how Christ's in the church.
Right.
So don't forget that we have this incredible responsibility, Christ in the church. So in our marriage, we have to make sure that we are sort of helping portray that image to the world, but also in our own marriage as we work to strengthen it.
I mean, and as we were preparing for this too, Mark, you were talking about how marriage, we know in marriage you're becoming one, and just how our words play an important role in that. I don't know if you want to share something.
Yeah, just the idea of becoming one in this process, right? Becoming, the two are becoming one from scripture that we see. The idea here being part of becoming one would be that you're building one another up and you're encouraging one another. If you're tearing one another down, then you're not becoming a very good one together. In fact, it's doing the opposite. It's kind of tearing you apart versus becoming one. So it's this very strong connection between your words, especially with your spouse, and how Scripture tells us that our marriage, is that picture of Christ in the church. So I think they're very interconnected, these two topics. Okay, so let's start with some Scripture. How about you start us out?
There's a lot. So I'll start with this. We will not cover all the scriptures there are about our tongue or our words or our speech. We will cover a handful, but oh my goodness, I was searching just for various scriptures on the tongue, and there are just so many and so many useful ones. But I'll start with Ephesians 4:29. It says, "Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them." And so this kind of speaks to what we were just saying a few minutes ago about use your words to encourage instead of discourage, and let everything you say be good and helpful, not just some things. Now, I think there's a fine line there, right? Because this isn't saying don't provide, let's say, constructive criticism or feedback if someone's doing something incorrectly or wrong or sinful. It's not saying ignore those things. It's just saying do that in a way, address those things in a way that is good and helpful.
Right. You can still be doing that and be good and helpful. In fact, oftentimes it's required to do that for you to be good and helpful, to give feedback and
true.
To sometimes rebuke or sometimes at least point out, their scripture says point out your brother's fault. So those that you're trying to be those people in your life that you know are also trying to be like Christ, it says point out their faults with them. And so you have to sometimes call those things out. But I think there's some guardrails that you can pretty simply put around. And, we've talked about, our whole point is about this concept of spontaneous obedience. And we've unpacked that to say it means knowing what you're obedient to. And then that way you can act during those times. And we talked about how that sometimes it's hard work to find those principles and set those principles and then move forward. But I like this one because it's very clear. Don't use foul or abusive language. Just flat out.
Right.
Take it out of your vocabulary. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to do any processing. Just take it out.
Right. No lack of clarity there and what to do or not do. Yeah. Now, I don't know if we want to get into this right now, but, if we are needing to provide some sort of constructive criticism, or if we'll stick with like spouse examples since we're talking about this in the context of marriage, but if your spouse is doing something that you don't appreciate or is hurtful to you or something and it needs to be brought up, how could you do that in a way that is good and helpful and not tearing the other person down?
One of my favorite ways to do this, and I've learned a lot of hard lessons to figure this out, by the way, is to become a little bit vulnerable in those situations. You could start out, for example, saying, hey, I might be off base here, but when you did that, this is how I felt about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if that's good, right, or wrong, but this is how I felt about it. Or when you did that, I think it might have had this impact on this other person. And, but showing some vulnerability, showing a little bit of humility, making sure that doesn't come across like, hey, I know I'm right, you're wrong, and you got to fix something. I think showing some vulnerability in those situations is really, really important.
Yeah, I will say when you come to me with that sort of posture that you just described, it's very disarming, and it is easier to have a conversation about it and to also listen to what you're trying to tell me versus completely be on the defensive.
Yeah, it basically invites the other person to sort of help and to solve the problem together, like this co-ownership thing, which I think is a critical way. How about you? Did you have something in mind for how you?
No, I'm really bad at that. I attempt to use your method that you just mentioned and oftentimes fail. So
well, I can relate to oftentimes failing, so that's okay. Yeah, one of the things around this don't use foul abusive language that we also talked through a bit, and maybe we should bring up here, is you don't have to criticize everything. So just because you notice something, it doesn't mean you have to criticize everything. And this is a point of discernment for sure, because if something is really bothering you, you've got to be able to get it out in the open. But an interesting way to do it would be what we just talked about, which is start a little bit by saying, hey, this is how I feel about that, and I'm not sure I'm right. But it allows you to have a conversation about it, and you can come to a shared agreement versus just saying, I hate it when you do this. When you do that, it makes me mad. These are ways that probably don't go well in those situations, but I think that's something to understand too. And also this concept of, if you're noticing something that happens or did happen, examine your own heart first too a little bit and say, oh, well, that's actually not a big deal. Or, oh, well, yeah, that's actually my thing. Mm-hmm. I just need to get over that or take it to the Lord a little bit. So don't shy away from having the conversation. Try to do it in a way that invites the other person in, but also do your own assessment. Is it something you just need to deal with?
Along the same lines of not criticizing everything, I think it's important to understand too that not every thought needs to be shared or expressed necessarily. We read in Proverbs 10:19, it says, too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut. And that's the New Living Translation version, which I think is funny. Keep your mouth shut. The NASB version says, when there are many words, wrongdoing is unavoidable, but one who restrains his lips is wise. So that right there is telling us, look, you don't need to talk a lot or about everything. Be sensible, keep your mouth shut. One who restrains his lips is wise. So it's actually saying to kind of hold back with our words is the wise thing to do.
Yeah. Exactly.
So again, it takes discernment, I think, and just intentionality with these situations to figure out what to say, what not to say, how to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say James in the New Testament has a very similar scripture then, and I know this is one that you've used for, I think, some of your own focus words for the year, but it says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. That's James 1:19 from the New Living Translation. Very similar concept. Quick to listen, slow to speak. And yeah, you don't have to always get your whatever's on your exact mind out there.
Right. Well, and I think of like, we're calling this cool your tongue, and it makes me think of, needing time to cool off, right? In order to cool off, oftentimes you do need time. And so James right here is telling us, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. So if we're quick on the listening part, which requires no words, right, then that can give us that time to cool our tongue if we're automatically on the defensive or something. If somebody's coming at us with something that's hurtful or maybe a constructive criticism or, whatever.
Yeah, cool down is such an important thing. It works. It's really, really helpful in these situations, especially if a situation that gets heated, or if you're feeling like you were wrong, give yourself that cool down time. Also good for workouts, as we've talked about. Also good if you're trying to eat a brownie out of the oven immediately.
Oh, I did that yesterday.
You need a cool down time. Cool down works.
My tongue is still burnt, actually.
So yes, cool down time, very, very important. Want to give a shout out though. I'm going to especially say the guys out there listening to this, don't use these scriptures as a reason to not talk at all.
Oh, good point.
So it doesn't mean don't talk at all, and don't say, hey, there's some scripture that says don't just keep talking. This means that you don't have to talk every single thing that's on your mind, but you do need to talk it out, get your ideas out on the table. But there's some strategies for you to do it. So I wanted to call that out. Okay, yeah. So in the same vein as very black and white, don't use foul language or abusive language. Another one that you and I did really early that I'm glad we always did was we're not going to name call.
Yeah.
We're not going to get heated and then call each other names. We said that really early on, even if it's quote unquote just being sarcastic or joking, we just don't do it.
Yeah.
I think that has proven really good. I
agree. And I don't know if we even actually verbally said, let's not do this. It was just always understood that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
In a joking way or not. We just weren't going to do it.
Yeah, because you can use that, hey, I was being sarcastic, or I was just joking, or I was just heated, or I was just this or that, but the damage could already be done, right? And so we just take it out of your language. I think that's a really good idea. Another one that we adopted a little later and that we're still working on, honestly, and actually work on this with our kids too, is avoid the urge, or just avoid, to say always or never. You always do XYZ. You never pick up this. The problem with those is they aren't, well, you mentioned earlier disarming whenever I approach you with hey, this is how I felt about this. These are the opposite.
Right.
They arm you. You always or you never arms you up, charges you up, ready to attack, defensive.
Yeah.
And
because it's you language versus I language. And it's also not true.
Right.
That there's just no way I would always do X, Y, or Z,
right,
or never do X, Y, Z. It's just highly, highly unlikely.
Right.
Dare I say that would never be the case.
Right. Can't say never, but
but yeah, so you always or you never versus I language and true language, right? When this happened, I felt this way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably, actually I've noticed it's okay even to say I noticed oftentimes, or just avoiding that charge up, because that's what always and never is designed to do. And I get that they're designed to sort of prove a point or make emphasis, but there's other ways you can do it without charging it up and creating that tension immediately from the start. So I think that was another one.
I agree.
So another scripture that I think is good about the tongue, and it seems to indicate there's more to it, is this James 3:2. Will you read that one?
Yeah, it says, "Indeed, we all make many mistakes, for if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect and could also control ourselves in every other way."
I mean, what? Like, we know that the tongue's powerful, but the way James calls it out here, it points toward that there's something more about being able to control your tongue. Mm-hmm. And it points to this concept of being able to control yourself. Right. And, well, look, James says it clearly right here. And I think it kind of plays out. Whenever you are able to control your tongue, I think it tells you something also about other things that are going on inside of you. So I like to bring it back to this concept of responding versus reacting that we've talked about in the past. The idea being, a lot of times if you lash out with your tongue, you are reacting. You're reacting. You're not taking that time to go, okay, this thing happened. Emotion welled up in me and I just let it all out. You're not taking that time to say, thing happened, emotion welled up, use my principles.
Let's cool down.
Yep.
Right? Take that time to cool down, use our principles.
Don't eat the brownie and burn my tongue immediately.
That burned all the way down my throat, by the way.
So you cool down, use my principles, then respond. So I think the way James says it much more just to the point. If you can control your tongue, you control your entire body. Okay, I like the way he says that. So I thought that scripture was important.
Yeah, I think that's good too. And we'll link back to that podcast on responding versus reacting in the notes. So if you missed that one, you can go back and check that one out. That's one of my favorites that we've done.
Do you have anything that I say that you're like, I don't like it when you do that, or it's not helpful?
Good question. I don't know that you say this, or maybe you did but stopped. It could just be like other people in the past. But like if I'm worked up about something, saying, "Oh, it's no big deal," or "calm down," those things in that moment usually aren't helpful. But I don't feel like you say that to me. I
definitely try not to say that, but
yeah.
I could, to your point, I could definitely think that for sure. So I might have said that in the past, but I think I've learned my lessons on those. If that was me, I think I've learned that lesson. I think I have one.
Did I say?
Yeah.
What?
When you want me to do something.
Oh, yeah.
You will say, "Are you going to do this?"
Yeah.
You don't say, "Will you do this?" You say, "Are you going to do this?" And I'm like, is no an okay answer to this question? And most of the time you're like, not really. No, that's not an okay answer. I'm like, okay, then just please ask me to do the thing.
Yeah, you don't like that. I'm working on it.
I know.
Yeah.
Me too. I'm working on a lot of things. So
yeah.
Okay, so cool your tongue. Don't use foul or abusive language. Make sure you are getting those things out there on the table that you need to discuss. Try to do it in a way that invites the other person into the conversation to help solve it, because remember, the two are becoming one. You're trying to become one with your spouse, because this is such an important principle. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be the picture of Christ and the church.
Yes.
You don't have to say every single thing that's on your mind. There's some scripture that backs that up.
Yeah, I do some heart searching.
Yeah.
With that. Yeah.
And then if you can control your tongue, you can control your whole body. That's what James tells us in James 3:2.
And that's pointing to how important what we say is.
Yeah.
And how important it is to get a handle on that.
Yeah, and it seems to be that what comes out of your mouth is a reflection of your entire sort of being. At least it seems that way in James.
Yeah. Right.
What you're saying out of your mouth seems to be a reflection of who you are in some way.
There's actually a scripture that says that. It's the last part of Luke 6:45. What you say flows from what is in your heart, or the mouth speaks of what the heart is full of.
There's definitely a lot of power in what comes out of your mouth, and it's a reflection, of what's going on in the heart.
Right. Okay, sorry. I know you're trying to summarize, and I'm coming up with these scriptures because I have one more.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah, put it in there.
And I mentioned this in the beginning, but it's Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. So death and life are in the power of the tongue. I mean, that is what we say is so important.
Yeah.
That it has the power to bring death or life. And what are you going to choose to do with your words?
Right. Are you going to build up or tear down?